A sudden outbreak of a devastating virus hit Seoul, impacting Yeonwoo's school trip. Yeonwoo, hopeful of connecting with his unrequited love, Soyon, faces a crisis when unidentified cells transform infected individuals into ferocious beings. The classmates' Seoul sightseeing turns into a nightmarish ordeal. In the last episode, Yeonwoo and his best friend Jubin were left alone in the room. The boys came up with a brilliant idea to set the room on fire so that firefighters would come to rescue them. The friends skillfully defended themselves against the zombie monsters because they realized that the ugly giants were afraid of fire. But unfortunately, the best friend doesn't have time to escape and is devoured by a zombie monster. Please support the channel, like and subscribe for new episode. But Yeonwoo did not give up and began to react and act quickly. He lit a pot of plants that was lying nearby, hoping that the monster would also catch fire in this way. Fortunately, it did, and the monster caught fire. Yeonwoo's chances of saving his friend Jubin increased. Now he had to deal with his monster. The earth monster quickly caught fire. It screamed in pain, its huge mouth finally unhooked from Jubin. Meanwhile, the boy was hanging on the tentacles of the burning zombie monster. It looked like it was starting to stick off a little bit, and it was unknown whether Jubin would be infected. At this time, Yeonwoo attacked his zombie monster with screams. The boy yelled at him to get out because he didn't belong here. Yeonwoo took a swing at him with a piece of newspaper that Jubin had given him. The monster managed to jump out at the boy. He had to deal with this monster first, and then he would help Jubin not to burn alive. Yeonwoo swung again, shouting death wishes to the monster. This gave him confidence in what was happening. The boy ran up to the monster. He was about to make the decisive blow that would set the monster on fire and kill it. With the words, "Go to hell," Yeonwoo attacked the giant. The zombie monster was flying at the boy. Its left side was already a little hot from the fire that was about to reach the giant. But this did not stop the monster. It attacked further. Its big, ugly jaws were about to bite into the poor but brave Yeonwoo. The guy was very surprised. He thought that zombie monsters were afraid of fire. Yeonwoo expected the giant to get scared and leave the boy behind, but he did not stop. The boy's attempted shot burned the zombie giant. It seems that Yeonwoo did not want to waste all the fire on this nasty, disgusting monster. The giant's cheek was burned. It was blackened and smelled like fried food. However, it was still more pleasant than what those vile monsters actually smelled like. Yeonwoo looked at the monster and burned with hatred and rage. It seems that the monster was not burning enough. It needed a bigger fire. The guy took a swing and threw a piece of flower pot foliage on fire at the zombie monster lying on the ground. The giant monster had just opened its ugly mouth. The leaves of the plant were flying right at him. He was about to taste something from hell. But Yeonwoo himself was frightened by what was happening. The situation was out of control. The zombie monster that was attacking the boy caught fire. Black as its soul, the smoke rose up. It looked like the fire was going to spread. Yeonwoo did not expect this to happen. Meanwhile, his friend Jubin was still lying unconscious near the burning zombie monster. Yeonwoo immediately thought of him and figured out how to help him. He had to carefully get Jubin away from the flames without getting infected with the white frog egg virus himself. When he looked closer, he saw that Jubin was wounded and covered in frog eggs in places. He was not breathing. Yeonwoo fell to the floor and screamed. It looked like there was no saving his friend. The guy started to cry. Yeonwoo looked at this terrible picture and kept apologizing, hoping that Jubin heard him and that it would make his death a little easier. Yeonwoo was hysterical. Tears streamed down from his eyes. He felt so sorry for his friend. He felt so helpless at that moment. Jubin had saved his life, but Yeonwoo could not. The body of his friend was engulfed in flames. No one had ever managed to escape the monster's jaws. Yeonwoo sat shaking and looking at Jubin in his last moments. His soul was devastated, but he did not have to be sad for long. Suddenly, behind him, Yeonwoo heard something very loud. Several more giant monsters stuck to the glass where he was sitting. Yeonwoo was left completely alone and defeated. He did not know how to cope with such an army alone. The guy got up and started to run away with his back. He looked at this picture and did not believe that things could get any worse. Hadn't Yeonwoo suffered enough? From behind the glass, One of the monsters screamed, making himself known. He saw Yeonwoo, and now his goal was to grab the boy and kill him. The guy turned to the side at a strange sound and was terrified. A whole army of huge, ugly zombie monsters was approaching him. He wasn't sure he could handle them alone, but he had to. He had to act quickly and smartly. He had almost no options for escape, because 2 floors were on fire and emitting black smoke, and a new batch of monsters was waiting outside. The zombie monsters were approaching the boy. It seems that the previous one had opened the door when he was crawling through it, and other well-wishers came running to hear Yeonwoo's cries. Meanwhile, the whole of Seoul was covered in white slime and frog eggs. It felt like a spider's lair during the mating season. The events shifted to the bus that took the teenagers on this ill-fated excursion, which turned into hell for everyone. Yeon-mi sat on one of the seats and greeted everyone. It turned out that the girl had turned on her camera and started her video blog. Yeon-mi asked how the others were feeling and if they had seen what was happening on the streets of Seoul on the news. She continued that they barely escaped and are now hiding in a bus. There were many of them near the cable car. Kang Ji-hoon, the headman, came up behind her and yelled at her. He asked why Yeon-mi had turned on the live broadcast and asked her to turn it off. The girl replied that she would follow him to the end. Jong Jong-yi wrote in the live chat. He said he was glad the teens were safe and added that he was worried about them. He added that it was no time for jokes in his neighborhood either. The observer then asked if it was normal that Yeon-mi was now on the live stream. The girl told him that it was perfectly normal, as she thought there were no monsters around. However, Ji-hoon shouted out that it was not normal, but did not have time to finish the sentence. Yeon-mi continued to tell me that it was a normal school trip to Seoul. At first, all the students were in the classroom. Unfortunately, only a small number of them managed to survive. In the back, So-young sat alone. She didn't want to talk to anyone or do a live broadcast with Han-wi. The girl was looking at the floor. Her gaze betrayed that she was heavily burdened with something. Meanwhile, Yeon-mi was going to tell us something interesting in the chat room. Jong-jong's follower said that if you look at the cells, you can see the nucleus. Yeon-mi was very surprised by this information. She didn't know or even notice it before. The subscriber added that he had seen it on YouTube. He said that the video conveyed the message that we need to be more careful. Another anonymous subscriber asked if the teens were near the Namsan cable car. He added that it was near Seoul Station. Yeon-mi confirmed this information and asked what he was getting at. The subscriber said that he did not live in Seoul, but the news had just told him to come to a temporary shelter near the affected areas of the station. Jong confirmed this information and told them to go there. Kang Ji-hoon, the headman, joined the conversation. They could not believe that there was a temporary shelter at Seoul Station. The subscribers added that teenagers should watch the news. Seoul is on lockdown. They thought the class would be able to leave Seoul by train. The teens had to hurry and escape. 3 classmates have already gathered around blogger Hong-mi. Kang Min joined them. He was interested in the information that Seoul was blockaded. He didn't understand what they were supposed to do. Hong-mi thanked her friends for the information and said they were the best. Kang Ji-hoon added that they needed to go to Seoul Station, and Kang Min found the way to it. It was really close. Suddenly, Ji-hoon heard something outside. He felt some kind of danger. He ordered everyone to duck. Chief Kang looked out the window and expected to see the cause of his concern. The teenagers must not forget what was happening around them and that they were not safe anywhere. And then a monster appeared in the window. He was very thin, with a thin neck and a hump. On his head was something strange, like a bird, or rather a pigeon. Hearing the sounds on the bus, the zombie monster turned to see if there were any new victims for him. Up close, he looked even worse. His skin was covered in feathers mixed with white frog eggs and slime. The monster screamed and hissed. He stopped and waited to make sure no one was on the bus. The teenagers quickly all hid under their chairs and sat quietly, waiting for the monster to calm down and leave. However, it seemed that the monster was not going to leave. He could smell their fear and scent, but he was not smart enough to enter the bus and verify his hunch. He just stood there and growled, instilling fear in the potential victims. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, sat next to Yeon-mi. The girl put her hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Ji-hoon was angry and cursed at the zombie monster for not leaving. Suddenly, an innocent cat walked by the nasty, soulless monster. The giant reacted sharply to him and returned. It seems that the monster has found a new victim. The cat turned to the zombie's growl. He was not afraid of it because he did not know what it was capable of. However, the monster made its victory cry, which meant that the zombie had spotted a new victim and intended to kill and eat it. The poor animal felt the danger and started running. Cats are very fast creatures, so he will most likely be able to escape from the zombie monster. The giant chased him. The monster's attention quickly switched from one victim to another. The teenagers were saved this time. The teenagers breathed a sigh of relief. The danger was over. Finally, they could open their mouths and express the fear that had been in their veins for 5 minutes. Kang Min said he looked at a map and found out that Seoul Station is 1.4 kilometers away. That's about a 30-minute walk. Ji-hoon said it was too dangerous to walk outside, so they needed another plan. Just then, a woman's voice came from the back seat and called out Yeonwoo's name. It was Soyon. It turned out that she was still thinking and remembering the boy. She asked what they were going to do with him, because he was left there alone. She added that Yeon-woo had stayed there to wait for them. So-young felt a storm of emotions inside. She felt very sorry for the boy, and also blamed herself for not being able to save him. The faces of his classmates were shocked. They no longer remembered the boy. Everyone was thinking about something else. However, the girl continued to speak and added that she had seen Yeonwoo when they were running away, and that he was on the 2nd floor. The last thing the girl said in her monologue was that she was sure that Yeon-woo was waiting for them, and that she could help him even now. Chief Kang Ji-hoon remained silent and thought about the girl's words. It was clear that he was angry that Seo-young was so worried about some sucker named Yeon-woo. Perhaps Kang Ji-hoon also felt something for the girl. In the end, the guy said that Soyeon could try to go there by herself if she wanted to. He said this on purpose, so that she would be scared and not do it. It seems that Yeon-woo had displeased Ji-hoon with something, and that's why he was pointing knives at him. To make it worse, he added that she should think twice, because the situation was not good, and just stood up. He never even looked at the girl. All the other classmates watched the situation and could not believe that Kang Ji-hoon could be so ruthless. The starosta added that they were going to the Seoul train station. He put himself in charge and told them to trust him. It's a pity he didn't act like he was in charge when they were all rescued by Yeon-woo on the cable car. Kang Ji-hoon said that he sympathized with Yeon-woo, but it was too late to go back there. It was suicide. These words did not feel sincere. He said them so that his classmates wouldn't realize how selfish he really was. The last thing he said was that Soyeon should have realized it was too late. In such a place, Yeon-woo could not survive. With this phrase, Kang Ji-hoon wanted to demotivate Seo-young and everyone else who felt sorry for Yeon-woo. Meanwhile, everything in Yeon-woo was on fire. The fire broke out in earnest, because everything in the cable car building was covered with a white sticky slime virus. As here, fortunately, the fire detectors worked and turned on the water. This should have dampened the flames a bit. Yeon-woo was holding on to the wall because he could no longer stand on his own and orient himself in space. He was feeling very bad. There was more and more black smoke. Yeon-woo was choking and barely breathing. He had to live. The fire department was about to arrive and save him. On the floor of the building were the corpses of hideous zombie monsters. Everything was on fire. The room was almost invisible because of the black smoke. Unfortunately, the guy did not make it. He held on to the last, but there was too much smoke and Yeon-woo fainted and fell to the ground. If someone did not save him immediately, he would suffocate and burn alive. For a second, the guy woke up and came to his senses. His body was struggling. He didn't want to give up. Not today. Drops of water from the ceiling fell on him. He was not fully aware of what was happening around him. He seemed to be fainting again. Suddenly, from somewhere across the room, I heard the familiar scream of a zombie monster. Now it was a scream of pain. The big, ugly monster was burning alive. Yeon-woo had defeated him, but at what cost? The boy stretched to stand up and defend himself. He probably thought that the monster was not yet defeated. Then he noticed something very strange on his hand. He lowered it to take a closer look. The guy thought he was hallucinating. It couldn't be possible. Yeon-woo put his hand right to his face to assure himself that he was imagining it, and that it was all the effects of breathing black smoke. But unfortunately, no. There were frog eggs on the boy's hand. He did not understand how he could have contracted this virus because Yeonwoo was very careful and cautious with monsters. It seemed to be the end. No one survived the frog egg virus infection. Yeonwoo realized that it was the end. He would die before he could turn into a bloodthirsty, disgusting, miserable monster and not feel the pain of transformation. He looked at his hand and fainted. At this time, the virus on his arm was growing more and more. The process was irreversible. The infection entered his body and spread through his blood and skin. The boy was lying helplessly on the floor of the burning building, inhaling the harmful black smoke. His whole life flashed before his eyes. He caught himself thinking that he had lived very little. His body will most likely not even be recognized, because by then it will have turned into a virus and become overgrown with white frog eggs, so he will not be buried. A miserable death. Now, the whole building was burning with bright flames. Everyone who was there and turned into monsters would die. They won't be remembered, won't be written about in the newspapers, because these people will not be found and recognized. Unconscious, Yeonwoo was lying on the floor when he suddenly heard some sounds that made him regain consciousness. How he wanted to live. He opened his eyes because the sound seemed quite familiar and expected. It turned out that they were fire trucks. They came to extinguish the fire, but it was unknown whether they would find a semi-conscious Yeonwoo. And the guy was already infected with the virus. If only they had arrived a few minutes earlier. Meanwhile, the events moved to the bus stop where the teenagers were hiding. Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon emerged from behind one of the vehicles. It seems that the class decided to flee to Seoul Station despite the danger on the street. The boy was looking around the area so that the teenagers could get there safely and avoid monsters. It was clear in front of them. Chief Kang Ji-hoon looked the other way. He did not want any unexpected trouble in the form of zombie monsters attacking from around the corner. On the other hand, everything was also clean. The previously lively and crowded capital was now so empty and gray. It was completely saturated with fear and pain. After checking that everything was clear, Kang Ji-hoon ran to another bus and hid behind it. He approached the front door of the vehicle. It looked like he had a plan. Finally, Kang Ji-hoon began to fulfill his role as headman, instead of hiding behind the girls' backs. He opened the door handle, probably wanting to get inside. But the cautious boy did not check whether there was anyone in the unknown bus. Suddenly, the starosta shouted to someone, opening the car door. It turned out that he was addressing his classmates, who were hiding behind their bus and waiting for instructions from the miraculous starosta in charge. He told them to hurry up because the door was unlocked. And the class, like soldiers, moved on command and ran to the bus, which was to serve as a new shelter and safe place. As soon as the teenagers ran inside, the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, pounced on them with questions. He asked a rhetorical question about whether Hannah could run faster. The girl was lagging behind everyone else. She was not yet on the bus. Kang Ji-hoon was looking for the key and asked if his classmates had seen him. They started looking for the bus keys together. Hanmi asked the elder if he was sure he could drive the whole bus. Kang Ji-hoon replied that he had 120 hours of driving experience in the game, so he was confident in his abilities and skills. Meanwhile, a very out of breath, Hannah came running. She looked at the floor and barely ran inside the bus. Her classmates were alarmed to see her in such a state. Kana's legs and arms were shaking violently, like those of an elderly woman. She was breathing heavily and could not say a word. Her friend Hanmi ran up to the girl. She was worried about her classmate and asked if she was okay. Suddenly, Hannah started screaming a lot. She said she couldn't take it anymore. She had a hard time finding the words. She added that she wanted to stay here because she couldn't run anymore. Hanmi told her friend to calm down. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon joined their conversation. He told Hannah to think twice. Did she really want to give up? Hanmi was shocked by her classmate's words. The headman added that he was sick of Hannah and her antics. The girl's face changed dramatically. She did not expect to hear this from the man who had taken responsibility for the class. Kang Ji-hoon's face was very serious. There was not an ounce of pity in it. His words were like knives. The last thing he said was that they couldn't stay here and that whining alone wouldn't help. Hanmi stood up for her friend. She criticized the words of the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, and said that he could have said it differently. But her classmate did not hear her and did not want to accept his guilt. Seo-young was watching the scene. Hon-mi said that Ji-hoon wasn't being an asshole. The headman replied that he was just doing and saying what he had to do and the girl should leave him alone because he was the boss. So-young was about to say something. She was outraged by the headman's behavior, and she began to see how callous and cruel their classmate, Ji-hoon, was. But instead of words of reconciliation, she could only let out a cry of pain. Her face twisted. Something had happened to the girl. It turned out that it was her knee. It was aching terribly, and the wound was still not healed and bleeding. Kang Min came up behind her. He saw that the girl was worried about her injured leg and asked how she was doing. The classmate was sincerely worried about his friend. So-young turned her head and was a little surprised. Never before had her classmate Kang Min been so attentive and caring. He told her to sit down because she didn't look good. Before, it was Yeon-woo who was so attentive to her. The girl fussed. She replied briefly that she didn't want to sit down because she was fine. So-young didn't want to show any weakness because she didn't know if they would attack her and leave her alone, like they did with Yeon-woo and Kim Ju-bin. Kang Min remained silent. In turn, Seo-young asked what the boy was doing. He was doing something inside the bus. Min answered with a question. He asked if So-young knew what the thing was that he had just taken out of the bus and was holding in his hands. He added that he had noticed it recently. Every bus had one of these things. Kang Min held out his hand to hand this mysterious thing to So-young. The girl was in a stupor. She understood what it was, but she didn't expect such signs of attention from a guy who had been completely indifferent to her before. It was a red little emergency hammer. It could break glass in case of danger without harming the owner. Kang Min continued and said that such things should be collected. After all, no one knows when they will be useful, perhaps on a cable car. The guy was talking and smiling at the girl. He really liked her. He was a little nervous. It was noticeable. The last thing he said was that he would give the hammer to Soyon. If they were attacked by monsters, she would be able to break the glass and save herself. The girl was even more embarrassed, even blushing a little. She was pleased with the signs of attention. It was a pity that So-young did not see the care in Yeon-woo's actions or did not want to notice it. Their sweet moment was interrupted by the headman, Kang Ji-hoon. He shouted that he hadn't found anything, so he couldn't start the bus. He added that there was no time to waste and ordered everyone to follow him. The starosta behaved like a real dictator. He never even looked at his friends. His true face was beginning to show. Kang Ji-hoon ran first between the next two buses. The cars were parked in the middle of the Seoul road, which was blocked. After examining the area again, the boy ran on. He did not look back at his friends and did not give them signs to follow him. Ji-hoon was on his own. There was an inconspicuous shop with a bus stop between the two buses that the boy had just run between, and Kang Ji-hoon didn't even notice it or pay attention. In the reflection of that shop, a figure could be seen watching the teenagers run. She was an elderly woman. She looked silently at her classmates. Her face was not the most pleasant. The last bus was in front of the class. I had to act as cautiously as possible because there was nothing left to hide behind. Kang Ming asked what to do if they didn't find the keys on the last bus. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, commanded that they would walk to the Seoul train station. The teenagers had already walked some of the way. Kang Ji-hoon looked out from behind the bus, saw that the area was clear, and commanded them to run now. The first to run was the self-elected leader, Kang Ji-hoon. He shouted for the others to keep up and run after him. Most likely this was addressed more to Hannah, who was a problem in their team. Kang Ji-hoon saw a target in front of him, the door. He ran toward it and did not look back. The boy started pulling the handle to get inside the bus and fulfill his plan. He had to prove to everyone that he could save his classmates. Suddenly, from behind him, he heard an old, unfamiliar voice shouting at him not to open the bus. The fearless leader, Kang Ji-hoon, was scared to death and screamed as he turned toward the sound of the voice. In front of him, inside the bus, the boy saw a monster. This also scared him, because the door handle was about to open. The monster growled at Kang Ji-hoon, making itself known. His scream frightened the starosta so much that he dropped the mat and began to fall to the ground, covering his face with his hands. Kang Min stood with the rest of the teenagers behind the previous bus and shouted to his friend to run away immediately. Everyone was terrified. Suddenly, an old woman who had been watching what was happening came out of the shop and shouted for the teenagers to run to her. My classmates were shocked. They didn't expect anyone else to be there but them. The teenagers were not going to run away and just stood there. The old lady noticed her classmates' concern and called out to them again, telling them to hurry up because the monster could get out of the bus or the noise would call other zombies. The woman was very worried and anxious, and she called the children for the third time. The old woman began to order them to run away immediately, but this scared the teenagers even more. Some unknown elderly woman shouted and ordered them to run to her. The faces of their classmates showed distrust. Suddenly, a seemingly crazy old lady shouted that the bus was full of monsters. The teenagers had to run away from it immediately. This proof was decisive, and the classmates jumped up and ran as fast as they could to the old woman. Now she didn't seem so crazy. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, also managed to escape. And all the teenagers ran into the store, falling down in front of the entrance. It seems that the bus full of monsters scared them a lot. The children's hearts were pounding so hard that even the woman could hear it. The teenagers slammed the door behind them. Some of them fell to the floor, and everyone was laughing together. Hunmi said that her heart was jumping out of her chest. She was running so hard. Suddenly, someone called out to the teenagers. It was not an old woman's voice because it sounded young and painfully familiar. Soyon recognized him and turned to have her words confirmed. She could not believe her ears and eyes. 2 other teenagers ran up to the girl. They seemed to be their classmates. The girls could not believe that Soyon was alive. They were very happy to see her again. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was not doing as well as the rest of his classmates. The guy was in a dark room alone. He wondered if he had died and gone to hell. According to the boy, hell looked like this. Suddenly, the young man heard something. He still felt very unsafe and listened to every rustle. He did not understand where he was or how he got there. The last thing he remembered was that he was lying on the floor in a burning building. It turned out that it was a huge, ugly zombie monster with 3 legs, similar to the one that killed his friend Jubin. The boy was holding a burning flower pot trunk. He swung it at the monster. The fire was to save Yeonwoo. The guy took a swing at the zombie monster and was about to strike. Suddenly, someone's disgusting hand, covered in frog eggs and mucus, cold as a dead hand, touched Yeon-woo. This course of events scared the guy a lot. He did not expect to see what he saw. The owner of the arm spoke to Yeon-woo. He asked why the guy didn't help him, even though the stranger had asked him to. It turned out that it was his friend Kim Jubin. The guy's mouth was covered with frog eggs. His voice was very nasty, piercing to the bone. It gave me goosebumps. Jubin said that he begged for help, but Yeon-woo did not help. The guy was very scared. He didn't expect to see his friend here, but Jubin didn't look like his friend. It was like he was some kind of demon in front of him. Still, Yeon-woo began to nervously apologize to his friend. The boy took his hand away from Kim Jubin's infected paws, but Yeon-woo's hand had already become covered with blisters from the frog's paws. The boy recalled that his hand was already infected before he died. But Yeon-woo was still afraid and screamed. His eyes widened. He did not understand why his friend Kim Jubin had done this to him. The guy looked at his hand. It was increasingly covered with frog egg blisters. Jubin noticed this and told Yeon-woo not to worry. Jubin's mouth was being eaten away by the frog egg virus. His lips were almost invisible, and almost all of his gums were exposed. His friend told him that Yeon-woo should become like him. Kim Jubin's gaze was glassy, making him look crazy. Yeon-woo's friend added that then they could be friends again, like before. Meanwhile, the frog egg virus blisters were getting bigger. These words made Yeon-woo's blood run cold. The boy's face changed dramatically. Those were the words of a madman. He turned to look at his friend Kim Jubin. Suddenly, the guy screamed loudly. He jumped out of bed. Yeon-woo could not understand where he was and what was happening. He felt as if he was waking up the morning after a night out at the club. He shook it off as if he had just run a marathon. It seems that it was just a nightmare and nothing really happened. He looked around to see what was in front of him to figure out where he was. The last thing he remembered was the fire, the floor, and the Namsan cable car building. In front of him, Yeon-woo saw a few more beds, white walls, lots of folders, and wardrobes. The boy still had a hard time understanding and analyzing. Just then, Yeon-woo noticed something. He felt a sharp pain in his arm, as if his consciousness had only just come back and his senses had returned. The guy looked at his right hand. It was all wrapped and bandaged. Only 3 fingers were visible. The pain in his hand began to grow worse. He was interrupted by 2 adults who entered the room. Both had masks on their faces. One of them, wearing a yellow shirt, seemed to be a doctor. The adults were talking about a manager named Lim, who was supposed to come. Up close, I could see that the other one was an officer. He was asked to take care of this manager tomorrow. They didn't realize that Yeonwoo was already awake and waiting for an explanation. Like here, the officer told the doctor to take a look at the ward. Surprisingly, the doctor was quite surprised. Did he really not expect Yeonwoo to regain consciousness so quickly? Or maybe the doctor didn't expect him to wake up at all, but Yeonwoo was as surprised as the doctor when he saw him. As if nothing had happened, the doctor asked how the patient's arm was and congratulated him on the fact that the guy had regained consciousness. Yeonwoo was silent. He was in a stupor. The man in the yellow shirt told him to make himself at home, but he had to fill out some paperwork. And then one of their employees had to show Yeonwoo a tour of the facility where the boy was being held. But the young man was still not analyzing the information very quickly, so he just stared open-mouthed and silent at the 2 men who had probably come to visit him. He was given a pen and paper. Yeonwoo started filling them out. It seems that the boy was left-handed because he held the pen skillfully. It was strange that his right hand was infected. In a way, Yeonwoo was lucky. The officer controlled the boy. Yeonwoo asked him where to write his address, and the uniformed man told him to just write his contact information. Yeonwoo politely followed the orders of the adults without asking any questions. The officer was very surprised by this. It seems that other patients were not so polite and immediately attacked the workers with a lot of questions. But Yeonwoo just silently followed all the orders. Perhaps he just hadn't fully recovered yet. The man in uniform could not stand it and started talking to Yeonwoo. He said that the boy was lucky. The young man remained silent, digesting the information the officer said. So the officer continued. He said it was really hard to survive now. He added that in Namsan, where the cable car was, there is a fire station, and his friend who worked there found the guy unconscious. In fact, he saved Yeonwoo. However, the boy was not surprised at all. He just nodded to the officer and continued writing. The man in uniform stalled. Wasn't Jonah curious about how he was saved? He had been 1 step away from death, and now he showed no reaction or words of gratitude for being saved. But Yeonwoo's answer struck him. He asked what kind of city it was. His face looked so calm that it was scary at times. The officer's face changed dramatically. He was very surprised by Yeonwoo's question. Did the boy not remember how he almost died? Instead, the officer took him on a tour of the room. It looked like a big gym, with high walls and lots of windows, so it was bright. Surprisingly, there were quite a few people in the building. The officer said that it used to be a gym for local residents, but they received an official letter from the disaster relief headquarters. The man in uniform continued that they were ordered to make this place a quarantine zone for survivors, and to serve as an emergency shelter. He clarified that everyone who was rescued in the area was here. Meanwhile, a man came up to a group of people and shook his hand and asked how the company was doing. He and his colleagues were wearing yellow shirts. A young man from that company asked the employee if all the roads were really blocked, asked what time it was, and whether there was any point in blocking the roads. Yeonwoo was watching. He and the officer were still standing there watching the scene. Just then, Yeonwoo heard one of the patients asking if he could go back to Bundanga. He also wanted to return to Seoul, so he asked the officer about it. Yeonwoo asked strange questions, as if he didn't remember what was happening in Seoul. The officer was a little confused by this question, but he put it down to the fact that the guy hadn't fully recovered yet. Perhaps he had partially lost his memory due to shock. The human body often erases memories that cause pain. The man in uniform told the boy that Seoul was now completely closed to prevent the virus from spreading to other regions. It was clear from Yeonwoo's reaction that he was genuinely surprised by what he heard. He quickly started looking in his pockets for something, even though he was wearing someone else's clothes. He didn't seem to remember that either. He just said that it was bad that the capital was blocked. In the end, Yeonwoo found nothing and told the officer that he needed to call his parents. He asked if the uniformed man knew where his phone was, which he could not find in his pockets. The officer quickly ran to the door and said that Yeon-woo needed to wait, and that a man would find his things and bring them to him. Yeon-woo stayed waiting, a little worried. Everyone was acting very strangely around him. He couldn't remember what happened, why the roads of Seoul were blocked, and why the officer ran away so scared. Suddenly, the guy's arm became very sore, making itself felt. The pain was sharp. It felt like something was cut out of it, some part of it. Yeon-woo held it up to his face to examine it. He still didn't understand what had happened to it and why it was twisted and hurting. The guy looked at his arm for a minute and tried to remember. He felt that he was about to remember, because the pain seemed to bring his consciousness back. Suddenly, he began to remember. His memories began to appear in his mind from the end, starting with the most recent ones. He remembered hearing a fire siren. I remembered that I was lying on the floor of a burning building. He wondered who had set it on fire. He remembered that he was waiting for a group of rescuers, but in his mind, he was preparing for death. So he miraculously survived and has to thank this officer friend for saving him and taking him out of the flames. Finally, the guy recalled that his hand was covered with white blisters, as if he had been stung by nettles or several nettles, so the size of the blisters was too large. However, the guy could not remember what exactly happened to his arm and why he was lying on the floor of the burning building alone. He could not remember anyone else inside. He still stood motionless like a statue and looked at his wounded arm, trying to remember what happened on that fateful day. Suddenly, someone called him by name, interrupting his session of digging through the memory gaps, which scared him quite a bit. It seems that his body was still tense due to stress or fear. Yeon-woo turned toward the sound, and his face changed dramatically. He could not believe his eyes. It was some guy. He was smiling broadly and asking Yeon-woo where the others were and why he was alone.